When I showed up at my dad's birthday with the watch he always wanted, he looked at it like I'd handed him garbage. Didn't even take it out of the box. Just pushed it aside and said, "Bit flashy for someone like you, isn't it?" My brother laughed. My sister rolled her eyes. My mother asked if I could take a picture of them. I stood there holding the camera, the daughter, the afterthought, the ghost in the family photo. My name is Nadia. I'm 29. The middle child no one remembered until something went wrong. I was the one who fixed things, quietly, got up early, stayed up late, covered the gaps, took the blame, filled the silence, and they pretended that meant nothing. I drove 4 hours for this dinner, spent 2 weeks deciding on the gift. He mentioned that watch 3 years ago, a passing comment at a barbecue. No one else remembered, but I did, because I always listened. We met at a steakhouse downtown, dark leather booths, heavy cutlery, waiters with fake smiles, the kind of place my dad used to dream about, the kind of place I could barely afford. But I booked it anyway, called in a favor, paid for the deposit, didn't tell anyone. When I walked in, they were already there, my brother talking loud like always, my sister snapping selfies, my dad giving advice no one asked for. I hugged them, no one hugged back. They ordered without asking me. Didn't notice I hadn't eaten all day. I picked at the bread while they complained about parking. No one asked how I'd been. Then the wine came, then the food, then the stories. My brother got promoted. My sister had a new boyfriend. My mother went on about some neighbor's kid and how bright he was. I nodded. I smiled. I laughed when I was supposed to. But they didn't see me, not really. Then came dessert, a candle and a piece of cake. My dad raised his glass. "To my son," he said. "You make this family proud." Applause. Cheers. My brother grinned like he'd won something. Then Dad looked at me. Finally, he said, "And to Nadia, keep trying, I guess. You'll find your thing one day." He said it like a joke. But no one laughed. They just moved on. I sat still. That watch, the one I saved up for, was still in its box, still unopened, still sitting on the table like a mistake. I didn't say anything, just stood up. My chair made a loud scrape, heads turned, but I didn't care. I walked to the front. The hostess asked if everything was okay. I nodded once, then I stepped outside. The air was cold, not winter cold, just sharp, clean, honest. I stood under a street lamp, felt the city moving around me, felt my heart slow down. No one called after me, no one checked where I went. So I started walking. I didn't slam the door, I didn't say goodbye, I just left. And no one came after me. I don't remember the drive home. I remember the silence, the way the road stretched on forever, the sound of the engine, the way I couldn't cry, not because I didn't want to, but because I'd done it too many times before. My apartment was dark when I got back. I didn't turn on the light, just stood there, keys in hand, frozen. The watch was still in my bag, wrapped, untouched. I pulled it out, held it in my hands. It looked smaller than I remembered, lighter, cheaper. I sat on the floor, back against the door, and waited for the feeling to pass. It didn't. It stayed. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop, looked at freelance listings, job boards, courses, anything. I didn't know what I was looking for, just knew I couldn't keep being this invisible version of myself. The helper, the filler, the one they never clapped for. The next day, I called out sick. Then the next, then I quit. Didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my friends, not even my roommate. I just disappeared, deleted my family group chat, muted notifications, changed my number. I didn't block them out of anger, I just needed quiet. Real quiet, the kind that lets you hear yourself again. I found a job at a bookstore, part-time, minimum wage. But the owner was kind. He let me shelve books in silence, didn't ask questions. After work, I'd go to the library, taught myself web design, then digital marketing, then product copywriting. At night, I worked on client briefs, started small, Fiverr, Reddit posts, then bigger. No one saw what I was building, and that was the point. I'd sit in cafes with noise-canceling headphones, staring at code, campaigns, landing pages, making things that made money. I moved out of my apartment into a studio. No roommates, no chaos. I said no more often to parties, calls, people. The only thing I said yes to was progress. It wasn't dramatic, There was no montage, no motivational playlist, just quiet. Daily, invisible work. One solved problem at a time. 1 month turned into 6, then a year, then 3. I went from 15-an-hour gigs to 5-figure clients. Launched my own business, hired a team, built systems, became someone. But I didn't post about it, didn't update my Facebook, didn't send holiday cards, because no one ever asked, so I never told. The people who used to tell me I was wasting potential never even noticed I was gone. Until one day, they did. A number I didn't recognize lit up my phone. I let it ring, then another, then a voicemail. My sister's voice, shaky, quiet. "Hey, Dad's in the hospital. They don't know what's wrong. Can you call back?" I sat there, phone in hand, heart steady, face blank. It had been 3 years since the watch, since the cake, since they clapped for everyone but me. I didn't cry, didn't rush, didn't decide. I just listened to the message again, and again, and again, until it stopped sounding like a plea and started sounding like a test. The voicemail sat on my phone for 4 days. I didn't reply, didn't delete it either, just let it live there. Like a stain I didn't feel like scrubbing. I went to work, sent emails, reviewed contracts, signed a new client, ordered takeout. Everything looked normal. But inside, something had changed. 3 years ago, I'd have rushed to that hospital. I would have brought flowers, paid the bills, held my mother's hand, done the good daughter thing again. But this time, I didn't move. Because I wasn't that person anymore, the one who needed them. Needed to be seen, needed to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. The quiet years didn't feel like a comeback. They felt like rehab. The first thing I quit was trying to prove anything to anyone, especially them. I stopped measuring myself against the family scoreboard. Who was doing what? Who bought a house? Who had a baby? Who posted vacation photos? I stopped checking. Instead, I built my days around small, quiet wins. A finished project, a clean kitchen. Waking up without that heavy lump in my chest. I deleted every number that hadn't texted me in over a year. Blocked 5, muted 8. It wasn't anger, it was preservation. Because every time I let their voices back in, mine got quieter. I didn't have time for that anymore. I was building something, not just a business, a self. One that didn't flinch at criticism, one that didn't beg for praise, one that didn't go numb when ignored. I had 5 clients, then 10, then too many. So I started saying no, hired help, tested systems, built a back end with nothing but free tools and stubbornness. I made mistakes, fired the wrong people, trusted the wrong ones. But I learned. The kind of learning you don't get from lectures, the kind you only earn by watching everything fall apart and still choosing to show up the next morning. People started to notice, not family, strangers. Clients told their friends. Other businesses asked for consulting. Someone invited me to speak at a virtual summit. I didn't post about it, didn't announce anything. Just opened another tab, took another call, sent another invoice. No applause, just silence. The kind I'd always wanted. My apartment changed, too. First the walls, painted them white. Then the furniture, clean lines, no clutter. I gave away everything that reminded me of who I used to be. Clothes, journals, photos, burned a few letters. Didn't feel bad about it. I bought myself a new watch, simple, black, understated. I wore it every day, even when I wasn't going anywhere. It reminded me what time really was, mine. The truth is, I stopped pretending I didn't care, because I used to pretend a lot, pretended I didn't mind being overlooked, pretended I didn't hear what they said about me, pretended I wasn't breaking. But the silence made it impossible to lie to myself. It forced me to look, really look, at how small they made me feel, how much of my life I had lived on mute, how many apologies I'd swallowed whole. So I stopped pretending and started rebuilding. I didn't date much, didn't really feel like letting someone into this new version of my life until I knew it would survive them. Most didn't. People wanted the shiny part, not the structure, not the discipline, not the part where I didn't need saving anymore. So I let them go. Because the more I healed, the less noise I could tolerate. Even my friends changed. I lost some, gained better ones. quiet, solid people. People who didn't need explanations. People who saw the world like I did. A thing you can't always fix, but you can walk through it with your head high and your heart clean. 3 years passed like that, quietly, deliberately, with a kind of focus I'd never known before. And then, the call came again. A new number, same voice. "Hey, sorry to bother you again. Dad's getting worse. They think it might be cancer. Mom's not coping. We don't know what to do." I stared at the phone, not frozen this time, just quiet. I went to the window, watched the people on the street, a woman walking her dog, a kid with a red balloon, a man eating a sandwich too fast. Life didn't pause. Why should I? I made tea, sat on the couch, listened to the message again. Then I did something strange. I didn't answer, but I opened a notebook, wrote down everything I remembered about him. My dad, not the image, not the version I wanted, the truth, the silence, the dismissals, the way he always made me feel small, even when I did something right, the backhanded compliments, the jokes at my expense, the time he laughed when I said I wanted to start a business. You can't even sell yourself." That one stayed with me, not because it hurt, but because it was the last time I ever asked for his belief. After that, I learned to build without it, and now he needed me. Funny how life turns. I closed the notebook, sat still, not sad, not angry, just clear. I didn't owe them anything, but I didn't hate them either. Hate takes energy, and I was saving mine. They wanted the version of me that still needed permission, still chased affection, still showed up to be insulted, but she was gone. I had buried her in the silence, replaced her with someone no one in my family would recognize, someone who didn't just survive. She built alone, quietly, without applause. And now they wanted me back in the story, but I wasn't sure they deserved a sequel. Not after what it took to write my own first chapter. I didn't say yes, I just showed up. 3 days after the call, I flew back. Quiet ticket, cheap seat. No one picked me up from the airport, didn't tell anyone I was coming, didn't expect anything. I walked through the hospital like a stranger, past plastic chairs, old vending machines, sick fluorescent lights that hummed like they were tired too. I hadn't seen him in years, my father, lying there, pale, small. The tubes looked bigger than him. He didn't notice me at first, didn't recognize me, maybe, or maybe he didn't expect I'd come. My sister was there. She stared at me like a ghost had walked in. "You actually came," she said. I didn't answer. She hugged me. I didn't hug back. I stood there, took a deep breath, and sat in the corner, didn't ask questions, didn't cry, just watched. They talked about chemo, about pain management, about insurance. I listened, took it all in. They were still so loud. The nurse came in, young, polite. She smiled at me. "You must be Elena," she said. My brother looked up. "Wait, how do you know her?" The nurse shrugged. "He talks about her a lot." The room got quiet. I didn't look at him, didn't move. Later that night, I walked into his room alone. He was awake, barely. "Hi," I said. He turned his head, eyes glassy, like he was trying to place me. "I didn't think you'd come," he whispered. "I know." Silence. He looked at me like I was a memory, not a daughter. "You look different." "I am." More silence. "I'm sorry," he said. I didn't answer. "Everything I said," he went on. "I was wrong, I see that now." Still, I didn't speak. Because it wasn't a moment I needed. It was a moment he did, and I wasn't here to fix him. I stood, adjusted the blanket on his legs, tucked it in neatly. Then I left the room. The next day, my mother asked if I could help with the bills. She didn't ask how I was, didn't ask where I lived, just, "Could you look at the insurance stuff?" "I think it's confusing." I nodded, took the papers, did the math, called the company, handled it. She smiled like I'd always been her reliable daughter, like the years hadn't happened. My brother pulled me aside, asked if I could loan him something. "Just to get through the next few months. I've got kids now, things are tight." I listened, didn't say no, didn't say yes. He waited for a reaction. There wasn't one. "I'm not asking for much," he said. "I know," I replied. Still silence. "You don't have to be cold," he muttered. But I wasn't being cold. I was just done bleeding for people who only noticed me when they were cut. The day of the family meeting, I wore black, not for drama, just because it made me feel clean. We sat around my parents' table, old scratches on the surface, same chairs, same stories. They laughed like things were normal, like nothing had cracked. I smiled, listened, didn't contribute. It made them uncomfortable. I could see it in their eyes, like they were waiting for me to crack. But I didn't. Later, my cousin, Marcy, pulled me aside. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she was shunned for dating someone they didn't like. They used to call her the mistake. She looked at me, eyes wide. "You really made it out, huh?" "I guess I did." "I always knew you would," she said. She meant it, I could tell. We sat outside on the porch. She told me her mom still didn't speak to her, that she worked nights, tried to go back to school, was tired all the time. I didn't offer advice, didn't hand her a solution, I just listened. Because sometimes silence is respect. When I left that night, I didn't say goodbye, just stood at the edge of the hallway, watching them argue about groceries and politics and TV shows. They hadn't changed, but I had. I was a stranger now. Even to the people who shared my face, my blood. They didn't know what I'd built, what it cost me, what I carried, and I wasn't going to show them. Not because I was bitter, but because I didn't need their eyes on my life anymore. The next day, I went back to the hospital, sat with my father in silence. He looked at me. "Are you happy?" he asked. I didn't answer, because happy isn't the right word. I was whole. That was enough. He nodded, like he understood. "I wish I'd done things differently," he said. I looked at him. Not with anger, not with pity, just stillness. "You don't get to rewrite it now," I said quietly. And that was the last real thing we ever said to each other. I stayed another day, then packed my bag, took a cab to the airport. No one asked when I'd be back. No one offered to walk me out, and I didn't expect them to, because when you finally stop being the one who chases, you learn to walk away with your head up. I boarded my flight, sat by the window, watched the city disappear below me, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was going home. Not to a place, to a self that didn't ask for permission, didn't beg to be believed, didn't shrink. They didn't clap, didn't congratulate me, didn't say thank you, and I didn't need them to. Because I wasn't angry, I just wasn't theirs anymore. They didn't know it yet. But I wasn't coming back. After the hospital, after the silence, after the polite nods and empty hugs, I closed the door quietly, not as a threat, not as a performance, just as a choice. They asked me to stay longer. Just until he gets better. He needs his daughter right now. It's family. But I had already done my time, and I wasn't a nurse or a therapist or their redemption arc, so I left. And they started calling, my brother first. "Hey, just checking if you had time to look into that loan." He tried to sound casual, like it didn't matter. Then he mentioned his wife, the kids, said things were getting tight. I said, "I understand." And that was all. He paused. "You're not going to help?" I didn't answer, because helping had become a currency, and I wasn't buying my way back in. The next call came from my mother, told me the house might be repossessed, said my name was still on some paperwork from years ago, asked if I could sign something, or maybe send a little money to tide us over. I said I'd think about it, then I didn't. A week later, my father passed. I got the news from Marcy. Not my siblings, not my mother. She texted me late that night. No emoji, no dramatic phrasing, just, "He's gone. Thought you should know." I stared at the screen, then turned it over. Let it go dark. They held the funeral that weekend. I didn't go. They called me selfish, said I was disrespecting his memory, but his memory had disrespected me for decades, and I wasn't performing grief for a crowd that never saw me bleed. I didn't send flowers, didn't post a black square, didn't cry. I donated anonymously to the hospital instead, in Marcy's name. A week later, the will was read. I was included. To their surprise, not out of sentiment, but because he couldn't erase me completely. I got a portion of the house, stocks, a few old accounts he never told anyone about. They expected me to give it back, split it. Do what's fair. I didn't. I sold the house portion, transferred the rest, took what was mine. My brother emailed me. "You're seriously keeping this? After everything?" I didn't reply. My sister left a voicemail. "I just don't get why you're acting like this. You used to care." But caring isn't the same as carrying, and I was done hauling their weight. A month later, I bought a small house, far from the city, near the water, quiet. I didn't decorate it with trophies, no framed diplomas, no photos of the past, just stillness. I started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. And one day, I wrote a story about a girl who disappears from her own life, then reappears in her own skin. I published it. Under a pseudonym, it sold. Nothing viral, just steady. Quiet success, my favorite kind. A stranger emailed me after reading it, said the story broke her, said it felt like someone finally understood. She didn't know who I was, but she exposed something. She said, "I used to think I was the problem. Now I see I was just surrounded by people who didn't know how to love gently." I read that line again. Gently. That was the word I'd never had growing up. They loved loud, sharp, conditional. I learned to be silent, not because I had nothing to say, but because saying anything only made it worse. So I wrote back, said thank you, that her message meant more than she knew. And that was the first time I admitted to anyone what I'd really been hiding. Not money, not success, but the fact that I didn't miss them, that I didn't want them back. And maybe the scariest truth of all, that I was happier without their love than I ever was drowning in it. Months passed. Marcy came to visit. She brought wine, sat on the porch, told me she got into graduate school. I offered to help with tuition. She blinked. "You don't have to," she said. I know. She was the only one who never asked for anything. So I gave her everything, because that's how love should work. Not as a debt, but a gift. When she left, she hugged me hard. "I don't know how you turned out okay," she whispered. "I don't either, but I did. The last time I heard from my mother, she sent a long email, said she missed me, said she was proud, even if she didn't say it before, said she hoped I'd come around someday. I read it twice, then archived it. No anger, no bitterness, just nothing left to say. I didn't burn bridges, I just stopped walking back. Because sometimes healing doesn't look like forgiveness. It looks like distance, like a quiet life no one claps for, like peace so deep it unnerves the people who once hurt you. They still don't understand how I did it, how I disappeared, how I became someone they couldn't reach. But that's the secret. I stopped asking for a seat at their table and built my own. No spotlight, no applause, just a life that felt mine, completely. So if you're wondering whether it's okay to let go, if you're scared that cutting ties makes you cruel, hear me. Walking away isn't cruelty, it's clarity. They thought I was still the quiet girl. I let them believe that as I walked past them. For the last time, if you've ever felt this, if you've ever had, to build yourself from the ground up because no one believed you could. You're not alone. Thank you for listening. And if this hits something in you, share it. You never know who needs to hear it next.